Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by the Union Capital Corporation, Natel's Air Conditioning and Heating, a proud sponsor of the St. Jude Dream Home, and Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher, and over the next hour, we're going to talk a lot about the New Orleans Saints and the NFL Draft, and we've got an exceptional panel for you tonight. Larry Holder of NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune, and Mike Triplett of ESPN. And gentlemen, thanks so much for coming down, as always, and really appreciate your time tonight.
Happy to be here. Yeah, and we wrestled with maybe like really starting the show since we were former coworkers.
That's right.
That we were going to brawl and go viral. Well, but I think we're going to restrain ourselves.
I was hoping that we would. It would have been my version of Jim Rome and Jim Everett. Yes, that we were looking for. That was even before things went viral. So we were definitely hoping that would happen. Maybe we'll arm wrestle before the end of the show, as Mike had suggested. Guys, first of all, before we get started, please tell the folks a little bit about NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune, if you would, Larry.
Of course, we're just wrapping up all of our draft coverage, rookie mini camps this weekend. We're going to have an army out there covering all angles, and of course, all 365, 24/7 at NOLA.com. And of course, we do have a print edition every day of the Times-Picayune, regardless of what some people might think. And of course, on Twitter, at Larry Holder, all Saints all the time. And I know Mike Triplett.
And occasionally, like Beverly Hills 90210.
And some occasional pop culture references on my Twitter feed.
Which you're pretty good at, I got to tell you.
It's scary.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Mike, how about you? Tell us about your new gig with ESPN. You've been with them for a while now.
Yep.
Well, first of all, you enjoying it?
I think it's been going great, yeah, and I think the draft was a perfect example of, I mean, all 32 teams at once. Not only did you get comprehensive coverage for the Saints if you just wanted the Saints, but then, the charts we got together on evaluating the draft right afterward. The power of 32, they reference it sometimes. And really, there's nobody else covering the league the way ESPN's doing it. I'm proud to be a part of it.
No, I would agree with you. Guys, let's start off, and I want to get into the individual picks, but just as a whole, overall, your thoughts on the draft.
I'd say the Brandon Cooks pick was a home run, and the rest didn't wow me. And here's the thing, though. I don't think they needed to wow. They needed to really kind of fill some holes. I think second-round pick, they filled a hole. And then the rest of the draft, you go linebacker, safety, linebacker, tackle, and you're kind of filling in the depth chart because, look, the Saints did a lot of moves. They didn't have many holes leaving last season, and they filled some with Jairus Byrd and maybe Champ Bailey as well. So I don't think they needed a home run draft. They didn't need a 2013 draft, but I think they drafted smartly, and they didn't reach maybe for a player. Like some guys may have thought, oh, well, they need to go get this guy, need to get a center, and it never worked out. And so home run pick on Brandon Cooks, and again, didn't wow me, but I still think it was a solid draft.
Mike, your take?
Yeah, I agree. I would throw in the second rounder as a really good pick, though, for them too. Different takes on him. Stanley Jean-Baptiste, his name started to rise throughout the pre-draft process, and I think a lot of people are high on him because of his physical size and the Richard Sherman comparisons. But some of the draft analysts, Mike Mayock for one, really high on him. Todd McShade, ESPN, was another who had him rated high. And he seemed like exactly what the Saints were looking for, a physical corner to add, a young corner too, because they've got, they're getting older at that position. So I thought through 2 rounds, the 2 guys that they got were perfect. Everything else, everybody would love to hear a big name in the 4th round. Yes. Everybody, exactly. We have the same Twitter feeds. Like, where's their, once you get into the 4th, 5th, 6th round, you're not filling holes in your starting lineup anymore. You're trying to find guys who you hope will maybe contribute on special teams, but you're thinking more 2015, 2016. So I'm intrigued that they got young athletes at linebacker. That was kind of a hidden position where they've got their starters, Lofton, Hawthorne, Harrelson. Yes. But 1 or 2 years from now, it's good that they've got some young athletes to develop at that position too. So overall, I thought they filled their needs. But no, look, they only had 6 picks. They traded up again, traded away the 3rd rounder. But that's the Saints, and I love that about the Saints. I think Bill Belichick has made it popular, the idea of trading down and accumulating picks, and it's
The
like
49ers as well.
it works for New England, but Cleveland does that every year too. It doesn't work for everybody. The Saints are not a team that needs to accumulate picks. They went for the home run in Jarris Bird in free agency. They went for the home run in Brandon Cooks because they're a Super Bowl ready roster, and I think they've added 2 players this offseason who are going to take them even a notch further. I love the way they attack the draft in that sense.
Well, I agree with both you guys, and I'll add, I mean, again, when you start looking at the first 2 picks, the first pick, obviously somebody you want to make an instant impact, and when you look at the second pick, Stanley Jean-Baptiste, hopefully he's only playing 30% of the snaps because that means that Champ Bailey's healthy, and he's a guy that's on special teams. When you look at the rest of the picks with the exception of the linemen, those guys, situational depth and special teams. And I agree with you, Mike, when you look at the salary cap down the line here, you got a bunch of guys that are on 1-year deals. You've got Gillette on a 1-year deal. You've got obviously Harrelson on a 1-year deal. Butler on a 1-year
Gillette's
deal.
got 2-year deal.
Does he have 2 years?
Left, yeah.
Well, his deal, if he hits 12 sacks,
Then-
it can void. He has to pay some money back, but he can become a free agent. So there's a stipulation in his contract. You could have been faced if you didn't give the 5th-year option to Cam Jordan. Which, of course, I'm just saying, both of those guys could have been free agents after 2014. Cam Jordan's not, and it all depends on Junior Gillette, because if anyone follows Junior Gillette on Twitter, he thinks he's the greatest player in Saints history and football history and wants to prove it. And so if he hits that trigger, he will opt out and look for the big bucks.
Well, you look at his salary right now, again, I think it's $2.5 million against the cap. He'll be looking for some big money if he can get to 12 sacks. There's no doubt about it. As far as the last pick goes, obviously a guy that's going to have to be a work in progress. Let's talk specifically about the picks. Mike, we'll start with you. Brandon Cooks. What do you like about him?
Look, I am always the guy who preaches caution with draft picks. Everybody's like, well, we've got 4 starters out of the draft. This guy will start here, this guy will start here. And I always say, look, it takes some time. Even their first-round picks over the years have always taken time. Meacham, Malcolm Jenkins, Patrick Robinson. This guy, though, I think is going to make an immediate impact, a huge impact. I honestly think he has the potential to be the offensive rookie of the year when you combine his style and the Saints' offensive style. I mean, he could hit home runs on screens and swing passes like Darren Sproles has, but he's also going to be their fastest receiver going out deep. And we know, especially in the Superdome, that they always have a guy who goes out deep and averages 20 yards a catch. Kenny Stills did it last year, and that's not even supposed to be his forte. So even if he is their number 3 receiver and only catches 50 balls, he could still have 5 or 6 home runs, including home runs as a punt returner, if he runs 1 or 2 of those back. I just think he's going to be a dynamic, electrifying player, and it's the thing that they needed most. For the first time since 2006, really, they've been loaded with playmakers, but as they got rid of Darren Sproles and Lance Moore this year, all of a sudden you're like, they're looking a little thin on big playmakers. So, boom, first round of the draft, they get one. Sorry to steal your word boom there.
Right.
That is my word.
All right, what can you add?
I think you look at him and people are going to say, oh, well, he's going to be an instant starter. He may not be the starter per se, but he may get 65, 70% of the snaps, which you're playing 3 wide receiver sets. It's perfect for Cooks. And one of the things you always hear the comparison of him and Darren Sproles, just because I think size and speed lends the comparison. And I thought about it. I was like, wait, he caught 1 million passes at Oregon State, and then you look at some of his stats, and he actually did have 60 carries.
Yeah,
which
he ran the ball.
Right, he ran the ball periodically, so they may do that. But I feel like the Saints, they were not shy in admitting they missed a home run threat. They did not have it. Joe Morgan might have been that player last year, and yet he's got to come back and try to establish himself. But I think he is an instant success. And Mike, you just rattle off all the first-round picks. And look, Meacham, how well did he do? Jenkins, in the end, how well did he pan out? Patrick Robinson, I think he's on the bubble because of this Jean-Baptiste pick. And so I think first time in a long time, with the exception of last year with Kenny Vaccaro, because he came in and was an instant success. I think they could get back-to-back instant successes with Vaccaro and Cooks.
That's huge. Also, again, how they'll utilize him. Bubble screens, wide receiver screens, the ability we've seen with Meacham and Henderson in the past, using him on reverses. The question I have for you guys is, where does he line up, though? Is he a slot guy? Is he a guy on the outside? Larry?
I think he's going to be both. I could see him, and I don't want to say he's going to become this player, but Steve Smith certainly became a number 1 guy, lining up in the slot, lining up on the outside, and he's not a big guy. But he certainly became a number one type guy, and you never know. Cooks may become that. I think they use him all over the place. You're not drafting a slot receiver in the first round. I think he's going to be versatile, and I think they're going to move him all over the map.
Yeah, and that's one of his strengths. As I've said, I mean, he kind of helps fill the void left by how they use Lance Moore and Darren Sproles in two different ways. And he mentioned Steve Smith, Deshaun Jackson's another one that comes to mind. But yeah, this is an offense where they're going to find creative ways. And the good thing is, he comes from an offense where he's not used to only doing one thing. Mike Riley, who's been in the pros for years before he went to Oregon State, runs a pro-style offense, and Brandon Cooks was rattling it off when we got him on the phone the first time. He said, they used me on screens, they used me on, they ran me deep, all the things he expects to do here.
Yes.
And exactly, maybe running it every once in a while. They're going to get him in open space, and they're going to take advantage of that speed for sure.
And the Saints had another hidden advantage because of the relationship with Mickey Loomis and Mike Riley.
Yes.
And so he had the full lowdown. That's why it's funny, and I wrote it on draft night. They called it clear and clean. They did not have to bring him in. They knew exactly what kind of player he was. They obviously were in love with the guy to trade up and get him. So I don't think they have any reservations with this pick
and it sounds
all.
like you don't need to know Mike Riley to feel that way. The entire league felt that way. He only took one visit, which is crazy because everybody else felt the same way. They're like, check this guy, checks out. I mean, there were reports that he's got about as high of personal character as anyone in the draft before the Saints drafted him, and they raved about that after they drafted him. So it's pluses all the way. We've talked him up now. I always remember the word Sean Payton used when they drafted Reggie Bush, and they talked about how everybody cheered in the restaurant when they found out they were going to get him, and they picked him up in a limo, and there was like probably a parade, and then Sean Payton said, okay, now we've got to start the de-recruiting process of Reggie Bush.
Right. What about Kenny Stills? What happens to him now? Does he stay in the slot? Does he move to the outside? Will these guys be interchangeable? What do you think happens there, Mike?
Well, yeah, I mean, Kenny Stills kind of took on that deep threat role last year, which wasn't exactly what you would have thought he was suited for. So now I think he maybe takes on a little more of the Lance Moore role, and Cooks then becomes. But I mean, like we say, that nobody has defined positions. It's all about creating mismatches, moving guys around, making them hard to find in the offense. But yeah, I don't think Kenny Stills now will, last year he sort of ran deep all the time because he was the fastest of the three guys on the field out of Colston, Moore, and Stills. Now Cooks will be the fastest guy, so maybe Stills will catch as many passes as he did last year, but probably not average 20 yards a catch. I mean, last year he had nothing but like 40-yard touchdowns, it felt like. So now he might catch more 8-yard passes if he knows what that even feels like.
And Stills, he essentially took Lance Moore's role away from him when Lance was injured, and that trend continued the whole season. And you could tell it aided Lance Moore, and you could tell as the season went along, he knew his time was up.
Yes.
But to me, I think Stills will still be versatile, interchangeable, because you got to think about this. How long is Marcus Colston going to be a Saint? You could see Stills and Cooks next year, the year after, be their main two receivers if Stills continues to progress like he has, and if Cooks can really be that guy we think he's going to be.
I got to believe Nick Toon and Joe Morgan kind of on the bubble right now. Both those guys are going to have to come in and show that they can make that next step.
A little bit, but boy, I got a ton of I broke down the receivers earlier this week. Ton of feedback with people disagreeing with positive things I said about Nick Toon. They're already giving up on him already.
Right.
The Saints are not giving up on Nick Toon yet. And especially when you talk about thinking about a future without Colston, one day they'll actually need that physical body type that they don't actually need right now because they have Colston and Graham. Although everyone's intrigued by Brandon Coleman, the undrafted receiver they got from Rutgers, 6'6", 225. But look, Nick Toon, what happened last year was he was their fifth receiver. They've always had a fifth receiver who's inactive every week, a red shirt guy. It was Adrian Arrington for 5 years, I think. Robert Meacham for a year. Yeah. And Nick Toon was the red shirt guy last year. He wasn't going to be active on game days. Lance Moore gets hurt. Nick Toon gets activated. And he had his big opportunity in the Jets game, and he really struggled. Dropped two balls that were huge. And then a couple weeks later, Lance Moore's back, and Nick Toon's inactive again. And everyone thinks, that's it. They gave up on Nick Toon. He's in the doghouse. That's not exactly what happened. Now, he could have played well enough to say, you're not taking me off the field. That's what Kyrie Robinson did when he got his chance. He did not take advantage of that opportunity. But that doesn't mean that they gave up on him last year. They're still high in his potential. They'd still like him to be their big target of the future. So I like his chances almost even better than Robert Meacham. Robert Meacham has to earn one of these top 4 roles. He won't be redshirted this year or whatever. But and Joe Morgan, I think he potentially becomes the odd man out because of what we just said. Brandon Cooks now brings that speed element. Nick Toon still brings something that other guys in this group don't have. But yeah, this is a make or break offseason for him to prove that their patience has been worth it.
What's your take on it?
Right. If that's the thing, and fans, I understand why they gave up on him, because let's be honest, the Saints did give up on him after the Jets game last year. They said, "Look, we can't trust you," and so they moved on. And now but you're right, Mike. They don't have someone like that on the roster. He's more of a Colston mold.
Yes.
And
with a little more speed.
Right. Exactly. And so you can learn from that. And to me, he probably could end up as their number 4 receiver on this team. I think obviously he's working hard. He knows I messed up in the Jets game, and I got to build trust with these guys. And I think you look at Meacham and Morgan, I think the last roster spot might come down between those two. Because if Morgan can come back healthy, and I don't see a need for Meacham on the team anymore. Meacham was on the team because Morgan was hurt. They needed someone who could do that. And I know people, and look, he's a good run blocker, Meacham is. But if that's the only reason why you have him on the team, that's a problem. Right. And so
But he won't get beat out if Morgan or Toon can't be a good run blocker. I mean, one of those guys is going to have to prove they're at least adequate in that department, because the way they love to use Meacham is in those jumbo sets with the 2 tight ends, the 1 receiver, and they're show and run, and they play action, and that's why he averaged 20 yards a catch. It's like that's what Joe Morgan did when he averaged 37 yards a catch the year before.
They hope Morgan can do that.
They hope Morgan can do it, or Toon's going to have to learn how to do it. Yeah.
The big pink elephant in the room last year was the lack of physicality of the wide receivers getting off the jam. Teams know that now. They're going to test this team. Brandon Cooks doesn't seem like he's going to bring something that's going to change that. What has to happen in the offseason for them to overcome that reputation?
Well, I think also you might as well throw Jimmy Graham in that conversation
I would agree with
too,
that.
because as we've seen, when he gets physical, it becomes a problem. We saw it against New England. Saw it twice against Seattle. And that's something that they have got to figure out, whether it's certain routes or just teaching technique or whatever. But that certainly has to happen, because those guys can be taken off their routes, and then Drew's sitting back there and he can't get rid of the football.
Sure.
So now here's the thing: there's not a lot of defenses that can do that.
Right.
And so it's not this. I don't think it's this habitual problem for the Saints. But if you're facing one of those tough defenses. Look, they're going to play San Francisco, and that defense is tough.
But it is a copycat league, and teams saw them struggle against that last year, so I'm sure they're at least going to try it.
They'll try it, but like easier said than done.
Right.
The Saints are trying to do it with their secondary now.
Yes.
But last I checked, they still threw for over 5,000 yards. There were still a few defenses inside the Superdome that looked as hopeless as, it happened in high-profile games. It happened at New England, although they actually countered that. And in the second half of that New England game, they had sort of taken the upper hand. They should have won that game.
And Jimmy got hurt that game, and they were able to march down second half.
And it happened twice.
And should have won.
Should've
Happened twice at Seattle. A little at Carolina, although their secondary is not as tough as it was. But then when Carolina was in the Superdome, it wasn't a problem. I've never seen anything like that, the home and away.
Right.
It was weird, but Drew Brees' numbers throwing down the field were the same as they've always been. His total numbers were the same. They were just really bad in a select few games, and that's a problem. But the good thing is they don't play Seattle this year, and that's when it was really a problem.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about Stanley Jean-Baptiste. Jean-Baptiste, here he will be Jean-Baptiste. Larry, your take first. I've kind of think that he's a guy that if you get, as I mentioned earlier, 30% of the snaps out of him, that means Champ Bailey's healthy. That means that he's got a little bit of a redshirt year to learn, and he's going to be a guy on special teams. If he's got to come in and be an instant impact player for them, that means they got some problems in the secondary. What's your take?
Has the ideal size. I think that's number one, what you see. And that's why he was even being trickled and talked about that he would be moving up even late in the first round because of that size. And really, Seattle has made that the copycat part of the secondary. And so, look, they want to fill that other cornerback need. But that's the thing. If I'm going to call him Jean-Baptiste.
Oh, and so am I.
Exactly, of course. And if he has to come in and start, I do think the Saints are in trouble, because the Saints have a list a mile long of guys that are going to compete for that second cornerback spot. Right, exactly, because you have You throw in Baptiste, you throw in Champ Bailey, Corey White, who started, and he wasn't as awful as people made him out to be. You're going to throw at Corey White because you're not going to throw at Keenan Lewis. And so he was not all that bad.
And he's a big, rangy corner.
Yeah. And so the Saints, look, he's not going anywhere. No. I think it's bubble time for Patrick Robinson, regardless.
Especially with his salary.
Salary, production, injury. I think all three, and you bring in a second-round guy. If he can't show it, he's out. But that's the thing. If you're the Saints, you probably would rather not have Baptiste playing because you'd probably rather have a healthy Champ Bailey and someone who could be productive on the field.
And honestly, also teaching these young guys as well.
Absolutely,
There's no doubt.
Well, I'll make the same point in reverse, though. I disagree that if SJB is on the field. I disagree that that's a bad sign for the Saints. It will mean he beat out a lot of guys for him to get on the field. I think it'll be hard. I completely agree with what you said with Corey White. Again, a guy, same thing we were just saying with Nick Toon, same thing we were saying with the receivers getting off the jam. Happened in high-profile games. That Atlanta game, they threw to that number 3 receiver. They kept throwing 5-yard passes to him, and Corey White was playing off. I didn't think that was big of a deal. But then in the Seattle playoff game, two of the best catches we saw all season when they threw it up for grabs, and for Corey White was in position and just got. But people won't forget that. But look, he's still got a bright future. Patrick Robinson, I think that it's spoken volumes that the Saints have kept him around already. They had a lot of salary cap issues, cut a lot of guys, and did not cut him before. I think what they're willing to do is say, we are completely wiping 2012 off the books. That's what they did with everybody last year. They said, the defense looked so bad in 2012, we're throwing it out and pretending it didn't happen. And so Patrick Robinson didn't get his chance to play in this new Rob Ryan defense. Who knows? Maybe, especially flying under the radar, maybe it brings something out of him. He really looked good earlier in his career, but obviously he's going to have a tough time. And Champ Bailey really speaks volumes. I've written this or said this several times, which is the Saints proved that they were willing to cut ties with older players that they don't see a bright future for anymore. Their own future Saints Hall of Famers, one after the other this year. The fact that they went out and added Champ Bailey must prove, I think, that they see a very specific role for him. And I think Rob Ryan likes guys who can jam at the line of scrimmage. It's something that Champ Bailey can't run down the field with guys like he used to. He can still jam at the line of scrimmage, and he can still win those balls, those jump balls, as if he's a receiver. And so I think they'll have a specific role for him.
And when you have a Jarris Bird and a Vaccaro back there, it could help that you play them on one side. And
I think Champ Bailey would cover the Marcus Colstons of the NFL.
Yeah, no, and I agree with both you guys. And again, I also agree with the safety. I mean, the ability for them to have safeties now that can cover over the top, that are playmakers, are going to help those corners. They're going to jam at the line of scrimmage, expect them to be able to cover for 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 yards. After that, they're hoping that safety can come in and give help if they're going to throw that side.
Right, and so, I mean, that, to me, if Baptiste comes, I guess I can buy your theory with Baptiste. If he comes in, it means he can play well, but that also could mean everyone else kind of.
Right. Well, they're not going to be forced to throw him in there.
Right. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Larry, what about Kerry Forth? What do you think about him? I think we kind of talked a little bit about it early. A guy that probably will be a special teams guy, but also somebody that down the line may be expected to be contributing as part of this defense.
Well, kind of. I know you get to that fourth round pick, people are expecting, wow, they're going to take someone that they've heard of, and people, I'm sure, scrambling on Google. Who is Kerry Forth? And he's an inside linebacker. It's not exactly a position of need, and yet you look at, they kept 5 inside linebackers last year. Will Herring's gone. To me, he probably fills that role right there. And it's going to me, it comes down to who plays the defensive snaps and special teams, and then who just plays special teams. Because last year, Kevin Reddick was just a special teams guy.
And like the goal line defense.
Right, exactly. Right. And so you also have to look at, David Hawthorne, if they got salary cap problems, maybe this guy can come in. He's a cheaper version, because next year, after this year, the salary cap, all of these guys' salaries boost.
Yes.
And so you never know. But I think they needed someone to come in. And like I said, there's a roster spot that is open, waiting for him to have.
What can you
Well,
add,
it's really interesting, and I know you're going to get to Ronald Powell, and I'll kind of lump them together because I don't think Powell is a specific pass rush specialist like Junior Gillette, although he might be. We'll see how they use him. But you add now Kerry Forth in the 4th round, Ronald Powell in the 5th round, Victor Butler coming back off this season-ending injury last year, Rufus Johnson, who finally made his way off the practice squad at the end of the last year. All of a sudden, you got 4 new guys at linebacker, and they didn't lose anybody. That's going to be a crowded mix, and it's going to play out in training camp now. What's funny with the Saints last year is they didn't plan to get rid of all their older players. But then all their older players got hurt. Will Smith,
right.
Roman Harper early on, Jonathan Vilma couldn't make it off the PUP list. And so they threw all these young guys in the mix, and it was like they struck gold. So this year, even I don't know what Rob Ryan's done always in the past, but if some of these young guys are showing some fire, they're going to keep them on the field. So it'll be interesting. I do not expect either Fort or Powell to come in and win a starting job right away, but we do know this. If they're on the 53-man roster, they'll have a package of plays. I mean, Seattle comes to mind, or what, San Francisco. Remember they came out in San Francisco with their like 2-6 formation where they had like all 6 linebackers on the field. They've got new athletes to play with in the linebacking core, and it's too early to say who's good and who's not. But it's new toys for Rob Ryan to play with, and we know that he gets pretty creative.
Do you like the Powell pick?
I don't know enough about him, but I do know that I listed their needs, and we all, I think, said receiver, center, and cornerback, top 3. But I put inside linebacker at 4 because it's an area where they needed young athletes. And I sort of throw Paris Harrelson's position into that mix too. They use Gillette as a pass rusher. That other outside linebacker, they need guys who can cover ground in space. I mean, if there's one thing they could steal from the other guys in the NFC South, it's Levante David and Thomas Davis. So to take a chance on young athletes with the potential to grow and teach, I'm very intrigued to watch them. And yeah, Powell is pretty fascinating because I don't remember having heard of him, but the #1 rated player out of high school, went to Florida. Obviously there's some athletic talent there.
So Ford to you is a Harrelson maybe
I
type?
think Ford's described as a Hawthorne and Powell as a Harrelson.
And what can you add about Powell?
As far as Powell, I think that what Mike brought up, that he was the #1 high school recruit. He was Jadeveon Clowney. He was Leonard Fournette.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he was that guy.
Yes.
And it's funny because it was back-to-back years. It was Ronald Powell, and then the next year was Clowney. Clowney's the #1 overall pick this year, and Powell is a 5th-round guy. And to me, what struck me is the way Sean Payton talked about him in his post-draft press conference. He said, look, it's really important to him. And I think that just goes to show you that Payton feels like this kid can come in and really try to live up to those expectations. He has that in him. And look, they're not in the same hemisphere, but I put this in my column earlier this week's 10 takeaways from the draft. He said the same thing. It's very important to him about one other player they picked up this offseason, and it was Champ Bailey.
Right.
So to me, I think
it's a catchphrase that's important to Sean Payton. He's talked about that a lot.
And because if you're saying that, look, he's like, look, he cares, and he's going to work his tail off. And you never know. But I'm curious to see how they even use the outside linebacker, because they didn't really they call Gillette an outside linebacker. He's a defensive end for all intents and purposes. So you only had Paris Harrelson. What do they do with Victor Butler? What do they do with Ronald Powell if he can come in and really kind of get into this defense? It may be a different set of formations that we haven't really seen because they didn't have. And Butler is a Rob Ryan guy.
Yeah.
I mean, make no mistake about it.
I would agree. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher, each and every Thursday night right here on WLAE TV at 6 p.m. with a live broadcast. Our rebroadcast is each and every Friday night on WLAE TV and Pelican Sports Television in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette at 10 p.m. Make sure you set the DVR or check out our broadcast each and every Thursday and Friday. Our panelists tonight, Larry Holder of NOLA.com and also Mike Triplett of ESPN. 866-3200 is the phone number if you'd like to get involved in the program. We take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll look at the rest of the Saints draft. We'll also talk about some of the other things that are going to be affecting this team as they go forward. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by the Union Capital Corporation, Natel's Air Conditioning and Heating, a proud sponsor of the St. Jude Dream Home, and Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House.
My life is full of statistics. Thing is, I could have dropped out of school and become one myself, but I didn't because I had people that believed in me. Here's another statistic. 7,000 students drop out every school day. That's one every 26 seconds. It's time that students know that we believe in them.
Inspire a student and share your message of support at boostup.org.
We can beat this. The spill in the Gulf is a catastrophe.
But we will solve it.
This is not a Gulf Coast issue.
This is a national problem that requires a national solution.
But what can you do to help?
What do you have to offer? Your voice.
Speak up.
Add your name to the petition
Demanding restoration and protection
Of America's Gulf Coast.
Sign it.
Share it.
Be the one.
Be the one.
RestoreTheGulf.com.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm Eric Asher, along with Larry Holder of NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune, and Mike Triplett of ESPN. 504-866-3200 if you'd like to join the conversation. You got a question for our panelists tonight. Let's go to Vinny Sunseri. Interesting pick. A guy that I think immediately will be a guy that can help him on special teams. He's a ball hawk. He's a coach's son. Again, much like Powell and Fort, but he's coming off a knee injury as well. Larry, what are your thoughts on Sunseri? Where does he fit for the Saints?
Well, his knee injury is more immediate than the others because Fort and Powell played a year after having injuries. Sunseri tore his ACL in October, so I think they're going to go slow with him. He may be one of those red shirt guys, but you never know. I mean, look, guys can come back from ACLs, and it sounds like he's going to be doing something. I'm curious to see what he does in rookie minicamp this weekend. But to me, people are wondering, why did they take a safety? They don't need a safety. What are they doing? And then they add all these undrafted safeties. Well, they have just about the exact same amount as they started camp last year. I think people got to understand, like, you just can't have four guys and say, oh, that's it. Who takes the practice reps? And you got to look for another guy. But no, I think he's the quintessential special teams guy, fifth safety. And much of last year, the Saints carried five safeties. People forget about Issa Abdul-Quddus. He was basically just a special teams guy, and then they cut him later, really late in the season last year. But they carried five safeties. So, I mean, look, there's a spot on this roster if he can prove that he's healthy enough and he can prove that he's the same player he was at Alabama before the injury.
Well, especially because you're losing Harper, Jenkins, and Herring. Those are three special teams guys. Right. And when you look at this draft, those guys can kind of fill those roles with younger, more athletic players.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Sunseri, especially out of all these guys, is the one that I think they drafted probably mainly because of his special teams ability. He's also an interesting player. It's funny because he's an Alabama coach's son, captain kind of guy. His bio reads like Roman Harper, a guy who will play down in the box, a guy who is good in run support, all that. So eventually maybe he could get on the field as a safety in that role. I think there would have to be an injury to get him on the field at safety this year. But special teams, as Peyton said, he's a guy who could be a four-core special teams player. I mean, and play all of them and play them well.
Tavon Rooks, a lot of people are comparing him to Zach Strief, a guy that may take a few years to kind of cultivate his talent, get some strengths, get some muscle in the weight room. Mike, what do you think?
Well, that's the better comparison than Marcel Jones, the other guy that they took in the late rounds a few years ago that hasn't been able to make his way onto the field. But, yeah, I mean, he is a guy that the Saints obviously liked his athleticism, and we talked to him afterward. He's listed as like 280 now. He was like 265 a year ago. He said he got up to 305, but you know, he's a guy who he said I think I can't remember if the coaches said or if he said it, that it was important to him to realize if I want to have an NFL career, I'm going to have to do the hard work to gain this weight. And they said they think he has a frame to do it, but the athleticism to start with. But obviously, out of all the guys they drafted, I think he probably has the longest road before he's in the lineup.
But you mentioned Marcel Jones, and I think because he hasn't panned out yet, that's why they take Rooks. Because Marcel Jones, let's see, his rookie year, he was on IR. Last year, did not make the 53-man roster, put him on the practice squad, and they tried him out at tackle, they tried him out at guard. It almost seemed like they didn't know what to do with the guy. And so you figure they've struck gold there before with Strief, and you know they've had some late-round success with some offensive linemen. But to me, I think it's because Marcel Jones hasn't panned out, and really, I don't know if he pans out yet. I think they said, look, we got to take a tackle, a young guy, and see if he can really push him or surpass Marcel Jones.
Right. And he may get a redshirt year. Probably will. Probably will be on the practice squad.
Could be, yeah. And that's the other reason, to go back to an earlier point, people love the idea of trading down. It's like they only drafted 6 guys, and we don't think they'll all make the 53-man roster. What if they had 11 draft picks coming? There's not enough spots on this team. And the offensive tackle who's really established himself is the guy they didn't even draft. It's Bryce Harris, who they picked up from the Falcons practice squad a couple years ago. They picked up Raphael Bush in a similar way a couple years ago. They do great with undrafted free agents. They do great with guys off waivers. So they're not as hung up on you've got to be a draft pick to make an impact on this team. Bryce Harris is the offensive tackle no one talks about. I thought if they didn't re-sign Streif, Bryce Harris might even have a chance to be a starting right tackle. So I think you're pretty set with a solid young backup at tackle there, which gives time for the younger guys to keep developing.
Let's head to the phone lines, 504-866-3200. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Our panelists tonight, Larry Holder of NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune, and Mike Triplett of ESPN. Abel is in New Orleans. Abel, welcome. You're on Inside New Orleans Sports.
Hi, how you doing? I have a question about, I like the speed we're picking up on these receivers and Stills and Meacham and Morgan. The panel feel like Brees can still air that thing out and get it to these guys as they start getting behind that secondary?
Abel, thank you for the phone call, guys. That was a theme from callers on my radio show last year. He's lost his arm strength. What do you think?
I don't see it. I mean, you think of the Seattle game, you think of the Carolina game, that dud in St. Louis. But did anyone notice what happened inside the Superdome last year? I mean, he still threw for over 5,000 yards, and the numbers when they went 8-0 in the Dome were preposterous. Both Kenny Stills and Robert Meacham averaged over 20 yards a catch last year. Brees, all the numbers, 10 yards down the field or more, 15 yards down the field or more, completely in line with years past. So I think defense has changed in some of those high-profile games. They had some real tough battles with the Seahawks, the Panthers. But I don't think you're seeing lesser arm strength necessarily. It's not like Drew Brees was racking up his yards because he was firing it through the air.
Right.
A lot, he threw 80 passes to Sproles, 70 passes to Pierre Thomas, and that's always been a big part of his game. So yeah, he's 35, his arm strength's probably, but it's not a major issue, I don't think.
And it's not like, I think what Mike is alluding to, it's not like he has to throw bombs every other play.
Right.
And look, he could still throw the deep ball. Let's be honest.
Sure.
I think people are just maybe in the back of their head thinking, well, Drew's getting older and he's never had the arm strength and this and that. Look, Jamarcus Russell had arm strength through the roof, and he's drinking purple drink somewhere doing God knows what.
My favorite was when Lance Moore comes out and says how he has to get used to catching balls from Ben Roethlisberger because his arm is so much stronger than Breeze's, and sometimes you turn around and the ball will be past you if you're not ready for it. And everybody's like, how dare you talk about Drew? Of course Ben Roethlisberger has a stronger,
slightly bigger guy.
If anything, you could say he was criticizing Roethlisberger because his timing isn't as good as Drew Brees' but nobody wants to hear anybody suggest that Brees isn't that.
That's right. Guys, I'm not going through every one of the undrafted free agents.
Good, I'm glad you're not, because I don't know if we could really have a good description.
It's a 4-hour show. Yeah.
You really don't know until you really see them on the practice field, but maybe some names that maybe fans should look for.
To me, I know the popular one's going to be Brandon Coleman. I'll leave that guy to you. The tall receiver. And there's also another receiver from Valdosta State. Was it Centavius Jones? Is that his name?
Yes.
6'3" guy.
I'm going with Sean Tavius. We'll have to find out this week.
Sean Tavius? I don't know. Tomato, potato.
I make it up as I go along, so it doesn't matter.
But I know there's I'm bringing up a safety, but I know Ty Zimmerman, and this is only from what I've read. It's not like I have this large scouting report, but I've seen people who know and watch tape, and they say, look, he's someone who to look out for, and it's not. We've seen safeties come in, kind of under the radar, come in, trickle in, make a roster, and so I'm curious to see where he pans out. Everyone's going to be paying attention to those wide receivers, and to me, though, usually you see a linebacker make the squad. It's very, very common. Jonathan Casillas, Jolon Dunbar. I know I'm missing some, but it seems like every year they get an undrafted guy. Might not be the case because they drafted two, but I'm going to look at the safety, Ty Zimmerman. But again, I could be saying a different guy next week after practice, so who knows?
Well, I'll go with a few. I'll get to Coleman in a minute. Scout put out right away good stuff on George Yuko. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Defensive. He'll probably be a defensive end,
USC.
sort of he's from USC. A lot of people had him as projected as a draftable guy, and that's a position where they rotate so many guys in and out. He's got good potential. The running back, you read his bio and you think he should have been drafted in the
Tim
first
Flanders,
round.
right.
Oh my, they're going to do it again.
And there's another. That's the thing.
They're going to do it again.
There
and
is
you know
a hole
what's going to
there.
happen?
Yes.
He's going to run for 400 yards in the preseason.
Yes.
In the fourth quarter against third string defenders.
Guys
They're
that
gonna be
never
like,
see the field
we
again."
got to keep 5 running backs
Yes.
again. They just can't help themselves. They should stop picking them up just because. But yeah, Brandon Coleman's the one who all eyes are going to be on. Here's the funny thing: people gave the Saints these draft reviews. Oh, what grade do you give them? And the one thing they're grading is, did they get any steals, basically?
Yes.
This guy was supposed to go in the 3rd round, and you took him. And Coleman's the one guy that some people were saying 3rd rounder, and they get him as an undrafted free agent. That's why all eyes are going to be on him, but also because he's so unique. 6'6", 225. He's going to stand there with Colston and Graham and look like just one of them. But look, there's a reason, obviously, the 32 teams passed on him. We don't know if it's health. We don't know if it's inconsistency. Right. So he'll have a lot to prove, but he'll be, A, easy to spot out there, and B, he'll have the most name recognition of all these guys.
The most glaring need they did not address in the draft is the center position. And I'll add this, something I talked about on the radio show this week. Also, interior depth within the offensive line. If you looked at the depth chart before they threw the undrafted free agents in there, you had one guy who was really kind of was the backup guard, and I mean it's a no name, honestly. It's some guy that they
guy was on their practice squad.
Right, exactly.
Calamete.
That's exactly. Yeah, that's what it was.
No, look, Mickey Loomis admitted the exact same thing you said, and I thought for sure at some point in the draft they would draft someone. But this is how the draft works. This you don't say we need a guard. Who's our highest rated guard? You just can't do it that way. I think they'll probably turn to Jonathan Goodwin for either, whether you want to call him insurance or competition,
right.
or maybe they keep him as a veteran who can fill in at guard or center, or maybe he beats out Tim Lolito for that reason, since they didn't draft a guy. You never know, maybe Matthew Armstrong from Grand Valley State will have the same kind of camp that Tim Lolito from Grand Valley State just had last year.
Wait a minute. 2 guys from Grand Valley State. I don't think they have 2 in the NFL, much less 2 on the same team and 2 competing for the same spot.
Right. But I mean, look, here's what could have happened. I think a few years ago, perfect example. They thought they needed that young center guard. They took Matt Tennant from Boston College in the 5th round, traded up for him to fill that need, and liked him. And he never made the roster. Brian De La Puente beat him out. And last year, Tim Lolito wins the job, and he beat out somebody else that we thought was going to be in based on more experience. So you never know for sure. You don't reach for a guy unless you have conviction, and there just wasn't a guy they had conviction on.
I think the 2011 center competition molded their thinking right now, because they thought, okay, Matt Tennant's coming in, and we don't have a veteran. And so then they panicked and got a veteran. I think they've talked to Jonathan Goodwin.
Kreutz, right?
Olin Kreutz, who, in all intents and purposes, quit. He just walked out. And literally, I saw him at the weekend after, and he was walking along Magazine Street while the team was flying a plane to whatever game they were at. So he literally walked out. But
he walked all the way back.
That's a long walk. And isn't he from Hawaii? That's a long swim.
That is a long.
But no, I think that experience molded what they wanted to do. They said, all right, look, we'll get a cheap veteran. I'm convinced Jonathan Goodwin's coming back.
Yeah.
And Tim Lolito, he is almost like that Matt Tennant guy. And so they don't want to throw all their eggs in the Tim Lolito basket, but they talked to a player they're very familiar with, feel safe with. And so I think that's why they didn't feel the need to go after a guy, because we saw how that panned out. Tennant didn't pan out, Kreutz didn't pan out, and then all of a sudden De La Puente out of nowhere starts. And look, he was serviceable, but I think they're in a better spot, and they didn't need to reach for a center. They just didn't. I think they have a plan, and they're going to implement it.
And that probably would have been that 3rd round pick if they wouldn't have had to utilize that to get up to Cooks.
I mean, you never know for sure. The other problem is there just weren't a lot of centers to choose from. It's not that easy to say, take a center. Shoot, Matthew Armstrong, the guy undrafted, some people had him rated as like the 12th best center in the draft. Would people feel more comfortable if they had taken him in the 5th round?
Sure.
I mean, they're just, centers weren't highly rated. I only saw, some draft lists, only 2 with top 3 round grades.
I think it was Marcus Martin and Weston Richburg, and both of those guys went in the 2nd round.
Well, they passed on Martin in the 2nd round, so obviously they didn't.
San Francisco took him. Ironically enough, that's where Goodwin left from. Took him early in the 3rd round.
Right, guys. Even if they bring in Goodwin, Lolito kind of becomes that swing guy if he's not the starter. Do they need one more guy on that interior offensive line that's kind of the guy that can swing between guard and center?
I think that Calamete guy, we don't know a lot about him, but I think Senio can come in. He's familiar with the system, practice squad guy. He's still around for a reason, and so I think maybe he might be that guy. But you got to think about it too. Last year, Tim Lelito
was the only backup.
He was the backup at left guard, center, right guard the entire year.
That's what they've done throughout. There'll probably only be 4 that make the roster. You'd like to think they're developing a young guy for the future, although maybe that's Lelito. That's the one problem, is maybe you'd wish it was a younger guy, because eventually Jari Evans and Ben Grubbs won't be in the starting lineup either. But maybe they'll find that guy next year. But as for who's going to make the team, it'll probably be a total of 4. Yeah.
There was a lot of talk that the Saints had considered drafting Aaron Murray at the quarterback position. It wasn't something that they had talked about going into the draft, at least from what we heard. How serious do you think those talks were in that draft room?
I feel like if he was there in that 5th round, I think they might have taken him.
Might have.
But I think he might have been the only one they would have considered, just because he would really be the mold of Brees, size and similar build, similar playing style, good timing, highly productive in college. I don't think they would, because around that time it was, who else was it? Zach Mettenberger and A.J. McCarron.
They passed on Mettenberger. They could have drafted Mettenberger and didn't.
But I think that they thought about it. Probably more than they probably thought about it in the past. But I really think next draft, I think they're going to draft someone, because Luke McCown's not going to be there anymore, and Ryan Griffin, he will be the backup, more than likely. And then you bring in a guy, and that's the thing. Sean Payton, and I talked to him. We're going to another owners' meetings next week. But the last ones we were at, I asked about Drew Brees' mortality, basically. Hey, how long is he going to be the guy? When do you start looking? He said, look, we're always looking, because you can't pass on a guy if he's there, in the situation you're in.
Well, but we've asked both Payton and Loomis a lot about that, and they backed up what they said, which is it's not a priority yet. So I think Sean Payton actually said, when those guys slipped and we started to say our grade's higher on these guys than where they're going, should we think about it? But it was clear that it wasn't, let's get a quarterback out of this draft, and they actually didn't. You know, they were not intending to ever get a quarterback out of this draft. But if those guys would have continued to slip in the 6th, maybe even the 5th, then they're going to be like, well, here we're not even.
The value is there.
Yeah, the value is there. But and I still think next year's probably too early. We'll have to see Brees' health. Drew Brees is going to start for at least 4 more years. And I actually researched a lot of guys over the last 10 years. Kurt Warner playing at a high level at 38. Brett Favre into his 40s, but he's kind of a bad example. But Peyton Manning's going to be 38 this year. Tom Brady's going to be 37 this year. Drew Brees is 35 this year. He is going, unless he gets hurt, he will be the starter of the Saints for 4 more years. You don't want to draft a guy who's going to be a free agent by the time it's his turn to start.
That's exactly the point, because the clock's starting.
Right, but that's the thing. I'm not going 4 more years.
Not 4 more years, but you don't want to waste it. You don't want to use a 2nd-round pick on a guy and then he doesn't ever play for you.
Well, here's the thing, too. What if
5th rounder would have been worth it?
What if at the end of this contract, Drew Brees, he's got 4 kids, and he walks, and you got 2 years left? I mean, that could easily happen. So I think the Saints have got to prepare as if that will happen, not if it's an injury. And this is what they are going to do. They are going to gauge him year to year. If he does regress this year, they've got to look to protect themselves.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about the draft itself. The NFL is talking now about maybe going to a 4-day draft. You guys know they're pushing it back 2 weeks. I mean, again, it was the mock drafts that they were ridiculous by the talk.
Well, just because I had posted like 10 and had like 5 projections.
I mean, but what do you guys think about the new format? And do you think it should be tweaked?
I don't mind if they would do a 4th day. I mind the 2 weeks. I think everyone in the process minds the 2 weeks. And I feel like the NFL is going to point to ratings. You had these, and as the ratings went, you had these gigantic storylines. Johnny Manziel is a huge storyline.
Well, it was sweeps.
Right. Johnny Manziel is a big storyline. And on day 3, Michael Sam is a huge storyline. And the fact that he was drafted brought even more people in when he was. Look, they were all waiting for that, and that happened. So I don't think any team wants the 2-week period. I don't think they mind the 4-day draft. I know some teams actually would prefer them to condense it because it gets your smarter, more on the ball teams. They can't reset the board. But I don't mind the 4-day thing. I mind the 2 weeks.
It's a waste of time to talk about it because it's going to be in
I
May
know.
permanently now.
I know.
No, look, I mean, it did help the ratings. And look, people ask me in chats in October and November who the Saints should draft. In January, in February, in March. I can't throw a mailbag out there. The day before free agency starts, people want to know who they're going to draft. People can't get enough of it. You can go with 25 mock drafts next year. It'll be the 25 most read stories you put out there.
Don't you get any ideas?
Look, it's not going away. They can make it a 4-night event. Everything they've done, and it's the same as people, saying, "Oh, I'm so tired of hearing of this on TV." It's what people are talking about. It's what people want to hear. They can't get enough draft. They should put it in prime time. They could drag it out over 7 nights. People would watch 7 nights in a row. It's popular. It's a beast that's never going to be contained. Yeah. So we all, in theory, would like to stop talking about it and get it done with sooner, but. The ratings are going to speak that.
Well, as long as it doesn't conflict with Jazz Fest, I'm good.
Yeah, that was a bonus here.
That was a bonus for you.
That was my bonus.
Yeah,
no doubt. Guys, let's talk about Michael Sands for a moment. Drafted in the 7th round, goes to St. Louis. I think it's a perfect fit for him. Obviously, coming out of Mizzou. Again, the reality show, the possible book and movie deal now, that's a little bit overkill. First of all, what do you think about the pick, and what do you think about? There's already going to be a distraction there, but now when you're talking reality show and movie and book deal, that even adds more to the mix. Larry, what are your thoughts?
Look, the SEC Defensive Player of the Year, you draft him. I mean, that's to me. Look, I talked with some NFL sources throughout this process. And look, there were legitimate football concerns. They figured, Sam's production was higher because he had Coney Ealy on the other side, who, even though they were paying attention to him, he still had 9 sacks and went in the 2nd round. So they felt like maybe that was a little inflated. But look, I think the guy can play. I think, of course, he deserves every chance as like anyone. But and I didn't mind anything that went along with the whole in their house showing the kiss. Look, people react. Just get over it, people. Right. I don't have a problem with that. Just get over it. I do have an issue with, now that's coming out, with he didn't let the Rams know that the Oprah network is going to do a documentary on him. He just informed them of that. So I see where people are going to come from. Wait, maybe he had. Why did he hide this? And was this, I understand striking while the iron's hot, and I'm sure he's getting paid to do it. And look, I wouldn't turn down a documentary following me around. It would be very interesting, high ratings. But I think that's the only thing that rubs me the wrong way. And once again, I don't blame him for doing that, and I'm sure it will help. It will help him and others like him.
He's got to be in a tough position because he probably does just want to concentrate on playing football and not be treated differently. But at the same time, he's there's a spotlight on him, and he doesn't want to pretend like he's shying away from it. He wants to show that he's proud. He's not embarrassed. He wants to, maybe for people who are having trouble, saying, look, I'm gonna wear this, and I'm gonna proudly be out there, and I'm gonna be a symbol of, you can live your life, you can play in the NFL, you don't have to be afraid of it, you don't have to hide it. There's a balance, and this is a perfect example of, well, why it's a topic of discussion. Well, wait a minute now. You're going to bring a documentary crew following you. Other players aren't like that. Right. But I think we could have the same conversation about A.J. McCarron too. Like that has nothing to do with his sexuality. That's in the NFL, especially if you're a rookie, you're not supposed to try to pretend like you're more special than anybody else. So I think those should be the tougher issues to deal with, and the fact that the NFL Network and ESPN and newspapers from across the country will be covering every one of his mini camps and everything like that. Those will probably be the issues that are of greater concern than him actually being a teammate in the locker room. Right.
Look, I think he should get every opportunity. Again, I didn't have a problem with the kiss. We see it all the time, with heterosexual couples that are happening when that happens. The one thing I'm going to wonder again is inside the locker room. All this extracurricular things that we're hearing about now, how does that affect the locker room going forward? The locker room is a fickle place, and ultimately he will be judged on what he can do on the field. If he can play in the NFL,
how hard he works, and how much effort
he'll make it. If he can't play in the NFL, he won't.
Right, and that's the thing. If he gets through training camp and if he makes a roster, I think a lot of this goes away.
I agree with that.
I think it totally goes away, because here's the thing. It went away for a good bit of once he came out, and proclaimed to the world that he was gay. Once that faded away, a lot of that drifted away, and it didn't come back until the actual draft. I think he gets through training camp, and if he makes a roster, I think a lot of that trickles away, and he's a football player, to be honest with you.
Yeah, this is what it's going to come down to: can he perform at a high level at the NFL level? And I think if he can do that, he'll be there. If not, he'll be in the CFL or he'll be doing reality television, one or the other. Guys, the Jimmy Graham situation. The grievance hearing is June 17th and 18th. I believe one of you two guys
he
broke that
beat
story.
me to the story.
Okay,
tomato, potato, whatever. I confirmed it, so he's not lying.
Mike, since you broke the story, what are your thoughts?
I think you're waiting for the arm wrestling at the end. That's what you set it up.
I'm setting it up.
He's like,
guys.
gosh, this thing's kind of getting boring. We got 4 minutes left. Who's more handsome? Well, look, it's a fascinating debate. Here's my first takeaway. I think Jimmy Graham the Saints would probably win that argument that Jimmy Graham's a tight end. I think he should probably be declared a tight end, especially when you realize that the franchise tag number he's being paid is based off of guys like Tony Gonzalez, who was out wide even more than Jimmy Graham last year, and Antonio Gates, who's out wide more than 50% of the time, and so on and so forth. Jared Cook, Jermichael Finley. He's just the best of that group. Rob Gronkowski, too. They all do both those things, so I think he's a tight end. But you do not know for sure how an arbitrator will rule, because this has never come up before, and he did officially line up in the slot or out wide more than 50% of the time. The debate will be, does that mean he's a tight end? Does that mean he's a receiver? But what I think is going to happen is I don't think they're going to let an arbitrator decide this. There's too much at stake.
I agree with you.
And we've never let anyone, Baltimore and Terrell Suggs actually had a hearing about 5 or 6 years ago. But before the guy made his ruling, they agreed to a compromise. All the other guys signed their own contract before they even had a hearing. I just think it makes too much sense. I bet the Saints are already offering $10 million. I don't know for sure, but I bet they're already offering $10 million a year. And he might be pushing for $12 million a year. I think they might both just decide, can we get it to $10.5 or $11 million a year and not let this arbitrator get involved that much? Maybe that's what I'm hoping, but I also think ultimately they're really risking a lot if they're going to let this, a law professor, that they have no idea how he's going to rule, get that involved.
I got a minute, Larry. It's all yours.
It's the ultimate game of chicken, and I think you go to the grievance hearing and you see how you feel it out. You feel out how that might happen. And then,
the jurors weren't looking at me.
Right. And then one side might balk. And I think that's what it's all about. But this had to happen for these negotiations to speed up, because they were not going to go anywhere until this happened. So I think it will. I'm with you. I don't think a decision's ever going to come down, but one side is going to balk. And I could tell you the Saints are hovering around the $10 million mark. And I think that still should get it done.
It reminds me of the Breeze. I bet we're really talking about, will they pay him 11 or will it just be 10.5? I don't think we're talking about 12 versus 7.
That's this big gap.
And same thing with Breeze. It was, can they get him for 19.5 or do they have to pay 20? And they wait and they wait and they wait. The window is probably pretty small.
I think it's between 12 and about 9.5.
But I think it's even small. I bet you it's somewhere between 10.5 and 11. If Graham wins, he gets a full 11, I bet.
All right, guys, let's start arm wrestling. No, just kidding. Honestly, it's been great to have you guys on the panel again. Thanks so much for coming down. Again, Mike Triplett of ESPN, Larry Holder of NOLA.com. And as always, thanks so much for tuning in to Inside New Orleans Sports. Each and every Friday, we have a rebroadcast of this program on WLAE TV and also Pelican Sports Television in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette at 10 p.m. Also, you can catch me on the radio, 9:90 a.m. WGSO, weekdays 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. Also, if you missed any of the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports, you can catch those at ericasher.com. Also, you can catch the podcast of my radio show at ericasher.com as well. Special thanks to our guests, Larry Holder of NOLA.com and Mike Triplett of ESPN. Also to the WLAE production staff, as well as Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Donovan Joseph, Kenny Juneau, my producer-director, William Hill. For Larry Holder, for Mike Triplett, I'm Eric Asher. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you right back here next week for Inside New Orleans Sports. Good evening.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by the Union Capital Corporation, Natel's Air Conditioning and Heating, a proud sponsor of the St. Jude Dream Home, and Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House.